Hey, what's up, people? I'm going to talk about something very important today. But first, I want to be clear about my position on Black business, Black owned businesses, and Black entrepreneurship. I support them all unequivocally. And despite what I am going to share and explain today, I do not intend to minimize, disrespect, or otherwise undercut Black businesses or their advocates. However, accuracy in devising solutions is important. Solutions must actually deal with the true root cause of problems. And words matter. So when you speak on something, especially a solution or a problem, what you say should be accurate, especially if anyone's listening. So in order for us to get to where I want us to be, which is to have equitable opportunity in this economy, I'm going to touch on a few misconceptions and hidden failures of Black business in America. So there are three main topics I'm going to quickly touch on, okay? One is the rally cry of support our own. The second thing we're going to get into is the plea of support Black business. And last but not least, we need to discuss the fallacious conclusion that us lacking Black business is a primary driver of the racial wealth gap. It created it, or it continues to perpetuate it, and the idea that the racial wealth gap, or rather the idea that lacking a Black business causes social dysfunction. We need to talk about these things. So let's start talking about supporting our own. This slogan to Black people, from Black people, to support Black businesses and to keep our money in the community became a flawed rallying cry starting at least in the 90s. The Nixon era popularized Black capitalism, but civil rights achievements finally caught up with daily life, and the resulting integration bolstered Black consumers to take their business to non-Black establishments they were once denied access to. This was our people exercising their new privileges. Now, here's the thing. If we fast forward to the 2020s today, the Black Wall Streets of yesteryear are long gone, but there still exist the Black ghettos, the red line neighborhoods, the over-policed zip codes, and in these lie most Black businesses. Now, clearly, the racial integration of the past was only superficial. It allowed an eager Black consumer to go to a non-Black business, but none of the non-Black consumers wanted or needed to come to ours. And the Black capitalism those businesses represent hasn't saved those neighborhoods either. So Black businesses have a dilemma today. Vast majority of them, or at least at the beginning of the 90s going into the 2000s, vast majority were already relatively cash-strapped, especially even now today, and I'm going to talk about that. They were cash-strapped by the nature of their very being, unfortunately, and I hate to put it that way, but being the product of the poorest and most oppressed group in this country. Now they've lost their customer base as well. So the rally cries to support our own came out to invigorate patronage as a sense of Black pride, a sense of intergroup economics, group economics, a way to bring back the blood that had left, that we had idolized in the prior images of Black Wall Streets across the country. Now, unfortunately, the problem wasn't that Black people owed these stores and these businesses support and had somehow forgotten their address. This is really what happened. What happened is these businesses went from maybe competing against each other on a street or in a neighborhood to going up against the entire open economy where Black people were now able to go out and participate in. This includes white-owned businesses, Asian-owned businesses, and everything else. They went from competing within a fishbowl to competing across an entire ocean. And we're not going to get into this whole idea about white ice is colder syndrome. We at this point are long beyond that. But that doesn't stop us from continuing to beat the drum of intraracial economics or group economics. So that's how we get all the way to today, imploring our community members far and wide to come support their own, no matter the location. But that really isn't how open capitalistic economies work, especially the idea that is this experiment that is America in terms of how this democratic capitalism ideally works. See, in the 21st century, using that rally cry is a shortcut. It's a shortcut that we think is we believe it to be reasonable. We think that it's a thing that's okay to do. It seems directionally correct. It feels good, to say it. It doesn't seem wrong in any sort of way, but it is a shortcut that is actually indicative of our failure of not only adhering to a collective code and economic self-sufficiency, which is not really a thing anymore at this point, but more importantly, it is a indicator of the lack of economic inclusion our community has in the greater society. The collective code comment that I made, though, that's really important because it also informs political action. This collective code isn't just where you shop, it's also how you vote, which is where we really need to focus. And not just how you vote, but who you determine should be even running and representing you. You don't want people who don't really represent your true interests to be claiming your community as the community they are representing, even if they look like people from that community. However, let's talk about something real quick. Maggie and John Anderson. So they set a pretty good example of what it looks like when they wrote the book, Our Black Year. They learned the hard way when they set up their family for a 1-year mandatory black business only shopping commitment. They went through all sorts of agony trying to buy from black owned businesses only for an entire year. And one of her founding contentions, unfortunately, however, was that one of the issues driving the racial wealth gap is that black consumers, unlike consumers of other ethnicities, choose not to support black-owned businesses. This was her premise that helped her motivate to start this entire experiment for a year. However, this premise is garbage because we are not really like any other ethnic groups or any other groups you can contrive in this country, as we've been here since the inception of this country and have a very specific equity stake here, which no longer should require group economics within our racial group in order for us to thrive. In fact, all other minority groups kind of grift off of our energy to push their agendas, and they have benefited from our work. People love to overlook that because the real solution that would be uncovered requires holding America accountable. And that's much harder than just chastising each other as blacks to stop shopping at white stores. It's also easier to just demand black people build businesses and bank black rather than finish where MLK left off. We should be fully integrated by now, and that includes economically, but we're not. And that is really why this rally cry exists. In the sense, I will say, in a sense, this country should be raceless by now. And I know that sounds a lot, but ideally speaking, with the work that has already been done up to and through the civil rights movement, if this was not a country that was hell-bent on keeping us on the bottom, we should have obliterated race by now. But we still have some work to do, but it is not impossible. The failure to launch, however, of black businesses, the failure of these businesses to launch into the highest ranks of corporate America in an equitable number, and the overall dismal state of black banks are both products of the racially architected socioeconomic policies, which has kept us out of play on the monopoly board for over 100 years, diverting our wealth and burning down whatever we built. So I'm calling bullshit on the support our own because it diverts attention away from exercising our socio-political ability to get the corrective policies and set-asides we need for our community to be fully integrated and succeed. And I'll come back to set-asides in a moment because there's a very important story to help illustrate why those set-asides make a significant difference in black businesses' abilities to actually compete or at least survive in this market. Now listen, if we flip over to the story about the slogan of support black business, we have a very similar story there. The essential difference is now that the audience has changed. Okay, now we're telling white people or non-black people they can do a good deed by us by going and shopping with our businesses. This is another plea that's of the same unfortunate, not root cause oriented nature. I'm going to tone it down as to what I really wanted to say, but you got to understand we are actually telling them something that is going to undercut us later. First, listen, It undermines our justice claim by giving white guilt an exit hatch from supporting transformative politics. Yes, recently it has been in response to the racial injustice that we've seen over the past couple years that folks want to do something to help us. But this is like pushing Nixon's shiny ball of black capitalism in exchange for root cause oriented policy and justice. It's sad because it's black people doing the pushing, and they co-sign white media to push it as well. And at best, really, it's a band-aid. It's a short-term band-aid to a systemic problem. If you know anything about root cause analysis or transformative reconstruction, you should have your stomach flipping upside down when you hear that phrase. Now listen, there's another part to this as well. It goes back to the basic notion of black business simply being business. Full stop. Black businesses are simply businesses, and that's what they want to be, and that's what they are striving to be. They're striving to be the best business they can be. Every single entrepreneur that's running a business wants to be the best at what they do, no matter who the customer is. And their identity as being black, they will not let it hold them back. In some cases, they will try to embrace that to bolster the business, but they want to be successful business people with successful businesses that do great business in this economy. Short of being a business that is solely for black customers by design, your business is competing on an open market, potentially a global market, depending on what you're doing. And so if we find that a majority of our businesses are struggling and failing, and they are, then we have an issue that's bigger than just asking non-black people to come shop with us out of benevolence. Every black-owned business wants to succeed on the idea that their business, they want their business idea, okay, to succeed based on that actual concept, not the identity of the ownership. But that doesn't mean they aren't owed assistance to overcome systemic barriers, as people who have been systemically oppressed, taken out of the economy, are used and abused in the economy. That assistance isn't in the form of guaranteed outcomes such as customers, but it is in the form of guaranteed equitable opportunity. That is capital injection. That is the ability to actually open a business and find a place to open it that's reasonably priced. That's the ability to not be systemically hampered because your identity is associated with negative customer service by everybody, including your own. There are so many things that are in play here that we leave off the table because we want to empower ourselves to believe that nothing can get in our way. I think that some of us, maybe a healthy portion of us, believe and understand that although those things are true, we're not going to let them wrap us up around the wheels. Although that is a constructive mindset, we have left off the table the energy, we've taken out of play the energy and the wherewithal to do advocacy for black business specifically, to lift up these businesses in a real way through politics, where we can start to grow a true black economy in the greater economy of this country. That is very much required. So with that being said, we got to touch on our last point before I hit you with a few working examples. The last point actually addresses the same underlying premise that Maggie Anderson used to drive her traumatic shopping experiment. That is the notion that there exists some tight cause and effect correlation between the number of times a dollar circulates the black community and our median wealth status of the black families. First of all, we need to understand out the gate, we need to talk about this elephant in the room out the gate, that the notion that dollars circulating within a community X number of times, aka turnover, that is a technical economic term, turnover. We need to understand that this notion is significant to the black community, is let me put it away, is significant to the black community's miseducation, because it's used against us. It's used to divert us away from understanding the true state of the black economics within the greater society, within the greater economy. Honestly, at this point, it is not extremely significant to the black community's economic success. It's blown out of proportion. It has been repeatedly debunked and found to be mostly baseless with no research or study behind it. No one can produce a single shred of study paperwork showing how the number of times the dollar has been circulated in any given community, let alone nationally, using federal or state government data agency reports. No one can produce anything that done the calculations to prove this. You can go out and kind of guesstimate and ask around, but in reality, there are no official data from any official organizations that contain the necessary information to even derive it yourself. There's no gold source on this number of cycles a dollar has or the amount of turnover a dollar has in any real major black community or metropolitan area, let alone nationally. So we don't even really know that these calculations or these turnover numbers. Now, even if someone did track down how many times a dollar circulates within the black community, that in and of itself doesn't really directly indicate anything meaningful. The multiplier effect of turnover is frequently overstated and it's misunderstood. It doesn't translate into all these benefits we claim. Turning over 5 times in one community might give you 1.5 to maybe 1.6 multiplier effect, or times the amount of times that money would actually grow business or create an expansion opportunity for other businesses, or maybe even employ more people in certain businesses. This really is a tool that is turned around backwards to disparage the black community into the empty promise of group economics. It's a hack job around doing real transformative socioeconomic justice work. And we know this is specifically targeted at us because whenever you Google group economics, the first several pages of results all talk about the black community. What this does do, if you want to be frank, is it does enrich a few businesses that can operate in a given community. Otherwise, if you have many businesses that are all competing over the same type of widgets being sold, then you have too many people in the market and you split the market so bad none of them can survive. So I do want to be clear, although you may be able to talk about this, let me back up. Although you are going to find a lot of documentation that references how many times this dollar circulates in the black community. I heard it stays for less than 6 minutes. I've heard less than an hour, less than 6 hours. I've heard less than a day. And then they compare it to Jewish community and Asian community. And there is no proof that anyone ever figured this out. If you go to even the gold sources of some of the books that have been written in the past, they reference books that reference another book that reference another study, and nobody can get to the root cause. No one can get to the root source, and no one's done the calculus. You can't Google and go and find any reports that done the work on this. This has been debunked, and it's really being used against us. Additionally, another thing that's been used against us to confuse us and to get us to focus on group economics, which again doesn't deal with the big issue in play, is the idea that there is this 1 trillion in buying power that's often quoted as some hidden superpower of the black community. It's mostly a farce. It's really a marketing term concocted for big advertising business to kind of figure out where to put certain resources in advertising and where to put certain dollars for developing products. The idea that we have a certain amount of buying power helps entice folks to come into our community or into our culture and try to get some of that money. It's also used to manipulate our perception of black economics in general. Again, this may be a real number if you can find the data that backs it up, which in this case for the actual 1 trillion, there are firms that can calculate that, but that number, no one is really talking about it except in our case. Because again, in our case, as the bottom caste of America, it's being used as a distraction tactic or an exploitation tactic. Nobody is worried about the buying power or the buying power of the Asians or the Hispanics or the Muslim or the Middle Eastern or any community you can kind of contrive together. That no one else is sitting around discussing, well, what's the buying power of these Native Americans around this area? What are they looking at? No. They're not doing that. They do that with us. Go look up buying power. You'll find it used in a variety of contexts because the phrase, the idea is business. It is a business phrase. It's a business phrase that's used especially in finance and marketing and, development of services for certain economies. So it's definitely not made up totally, but it is definitely a distraction tactic. Here's the real deal. It takes money to create businesses, and business creates revenue. No matter who comes to buy stuff from you or where that green cash comes from, businesses create revenue if it's a white person, a black person, whoever coming in the door to buy from you. When you get revenue, it creates wealth in the business if there's equity generated for the owners. If the owners over time start to develop equity in the business, that creates wealth for the owners of the business. The businesses also create jobs, but jobs are not wealth. Ownership is wealth. And as a matter of fact, most of the wealth of a middle-class family is held in their home and in their retirement accounts. Most don't own businesses. And the jobs created by most black businesses today are not the type you buy homes using income from. We had those things in the past to small degrees, from Black Wall Street through the 90s, but we lost and continue to lose them repeatedly to backlash and government abandonment. They destroy and then they don't persecute or compensate. And when you do that, you perpetually keep us from being integrated into the economy in an equitable way. And when you're fully integrated into the economy without racial barriers, there are no racial communities in which you need to track the circulation of dollars. And that's where we need to be getting to. That's what we need to remember, because we've been racialized out, but we need to be fully inside. If we look at the makeup of white America, you should first realize they aren't really a community. We talk about Asian community, we talk about Hispanic community, we talk about Native American community, we talk Middle Eastern, talk Islamic, we talk Jewish, we talk black community. But we never really can say white community, because they're not a single sect of delineated people by ethnic makeup or race. They're a amalgamation at best, and they don't even try to know each other like that. There is no connectedness there outside of a shared citizenship. So in fact, those people are actually simply everyone else who is not identified as a member of a minority group. So now, when we realize that, we're really starting to talk about us versus the rest of America. And now we're starting to talk about us being treated as, or not being treated as, equal Americans. We've been stolen from and kept from recovering, and that's where the real fight needs to be waged. You have to remember this. The working concept of America, right? The idea, the working concept of America being this melting pot, and once you melt into it, you become white, or honorary white, or simply American. And it's only inside of that amalgamation can we survive. You can't be stuck to the side of the pot. And if you're kept out like we have been, you fail to thrive, you barely survive, and you just might die. Many of these people who are now white are people who weren't even white when they first came to America. They got melted into the pot though. Go read the book, How the Irish Became White. That same play in that book has worked for Asians and now Latinos as well. We're the ones who are still on the bottom, and it isn't because we didn't spend money with black shops. Their wealth comes from being able to equitably participate in the open economy, opening businesses that bring more money in than they spend, and being paid fair wages. They're able to invest, they're able to buy homes and the like. When Asians and Latinos in America spend with their own folks, it's because they're mainly going there to buy cultural items that aren't sold anywhere else nearby. Or they're going there for a community because they just arrived and they build a community that's connected to that store. It's not some blind minority economic loyalty program. It's proximity, selection, and community. However, in the black community, and this is where you got to listen to the nuance. This is going to be different because we're not them. In the black community today, there really aren't those types of things. We don't really have many things that need a specialty ethnic store because we are America, and America is us. Because we've been here the longest and have influenced the country the most of any single group you can name. But they keep us on the periphery of the economic system. This is our country, and we are totally gone and too far away from this daydream of building some isolated economy on the side of the melting pot. A community, no matter where they are in this country or in the world, when we're talking about specifically their ability to have a macro economy or a macro operations of how money moves around, a community is intimately linked with the rest of society and the world it exists in through the inflow and outflow of income and goods. Our particular community is the overall American society that we're in, but we're only halfway integrated into it. So now we're panicking as to which way to go. Do we go in or do we go out? That's what's happening every day. We should go separate ways. We should go and make our own little Wall Street. We should go and get our own land from one sect. And the other group is like, no, we're here. We need to finish the job that was done by the civil rights movement. The integration was only halfway baked. We got to finish baking it, baby. We used to be abused as the fire that kept the pot hot. Now we're on the side and we need to force our way further down into this melt. We have to finish the integration with the fullest, and we have to finish it with set-asides and policies. The lack of wealth is now lending itself to a situation where we are not able to operate businesses that are competitive, that are able to be wherever the customer is, and that are able to actually go after the customers they want. But we have consumers in our community that treat it as if everything is equal, and they go wherever they can get the best deal, wherever they can get the best opportunity, and wherever they get the best product. This is all rolling downhill for us in the sense that the oppressive policies of the past have led to a lack of Black-owned businesses at the end of the day. It's not a lack of businesses leading to a lack of wealth. It's the lack of wealth that's leading to the lack of businesses. So let's look at a study, for instance. All right, we're going to talk about something very specific right now. We're going to get into a study from McKinsey & Company. They're a management consulting firm, and they published a report in October of 2020 on the state of Black-owned business in America. This was just at the top of the pandemic, but it's still relevant in terms of the Black community because nothing's really changed, not positively anyway. So I want to drop some very significant tidbits from that study on you, and so we're going to look at some quotes directly out of the text. So just like when we talked about wealth and how wealth is necessary to start a business, you have to properly capitalize the business at the outset in order to make it viable through some of the most strenuous phases of its startup and during the downturns. It needs to have cash on hand reserves in order to survive and keep workers on payroll. But what happens is, when you don't have that stuff, things don't go as you really want them to, right? So what happens when you don't have enough capital? Black businesses or Black business owners have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic-linked economic downturn, partially because they were more likely to already be in a precarious position, including more likely to be located in communities with business environments that are more likely to produce poor business outcomes. Indeed, about 58% of Black-owned businesses were at risk of financial distress before the pandemic, compared with 27% of white-owned businesses. The pandemic contributed to tipping 41% of Black-owned businesses into foreclosure from February to April of 2020. Y'all should be like, what? Yes, did you realize that the majority of Black-owned businesses going into the pandemic were in a precarious financial position? And did you realize that when it hit, within the first 6 months, within the first year even, 41% of them got wiped out? That wasn't in the news that I remember. I didn't see headlines saying all the Black-owned businesses getting shut down. I didn't hear about that. How do we know? How do we know that that happened? Well, do they want us to know that? No, because they don't want to solve it. They don't want to put any policy in place and fix what they did to us that led us to making such fragile businesses. They don't want to deal with that, so they're not going to promote that information too hard. But also, how do we know that these Black-owned businesses came to be and had so little money to operate? Here's another quote. Black entrepreneurs start their business with about $35,000 of capital. White entrepreneurs, $107,000. So, that's a lot right there. That's a big difference, okay? I think you know that. So that already sets you up for something that could fall apart at least 2 times as quickly as any of your competitors if you keep everything else the same, right? Now, what happens when we start the business, we get it going, or maybe we're in the beginning stages and we brought our own money into the thing, our $35,000, but we need to go get a loan? Well, here's another piece of information from the study. 73% of Black loan applicants were asked to provide financial statements for their business, compared with only 50% of white applicants with comparable profiles. In addition, 31% of Black applicants were asked to provide their personal W-2 forms. No white applicants received such a request. Yo. They don't even ask white people for their W-2s, at least in the data set that they looked at. Okay, some of y'all ain't even got W-2s because you're starting these businesses as your only gig. So if you need to go get a loan, I don't know. Now, let's ask, after you get past those hurdles, you're ready to take on the world, right? Well, I got another one for you, buddy. Being located in a co-ethnic market where community members, customers, and business owners are of the same ethnicity results in lower revenue, even for businesses of comparable quality. Research shows that even when they have better Yelp reviews, businesses in majority Black communities have lower revenues than those outside majority Black communities. So they made operating a business in a Black neighborhood a liability, a threat, so much. They made our communities even a bastion of poor performance, so much that even with a 5-star Yelp review, our businesses can't do as well as if they were just put into a white neighborhood or a non-Black neighborhood of any sort. That's crazy. Y'all gotta, that has to hit you. So this report goes on to say, honestly, that, in conclusion, they said that the solution to the Black business problem they just talked on, are a couple different things. You ready? Policy creation, programs, training, and most of all, a cash capital injection. They did not say, call Pookie and them and tell them to get down here and buy some milk at the Black-owned corner store. Nor did they give Karen the option of absolving her racist sins and drowning her white privilege by purchasing wine from Pure Vin in Detroit. Okay? So before I move on from this, to those who are already wanting to jump up out of their seat and say, we got to move on from slavery and oppression and build our own. We can't make them give us anything. We got to stop begging. We ain't got no other options but to build our own selves with nobody else's help. For people who are saying these things, I know you're ready. I know you've been sitting here waiting to hit that comment button. No economist in the world will agree with that notion or any of your notions there, let alone the feasibility of it. It's been done multiple times and failed even more. What hasn't been done is a substantial exercise of our political muscle for a transformative Black agenda to restore our stolen and diverted wealth. The money should have been used to build stronger businesses instead of being taken out of our accounts, being swindled out of our parents, being destroyed when they burned our buildings, are being prevented from even getting into our hands when they denied us a proper education. We should have been able to build stronger businesses with the inheritance, so to speak, that we never got. Instead, right now, we're begging for business. And our businesses are still failing at a rate of 80% within the first 18 months. Even with those slogans being passed around like needles, we still can't keep something open for more than 18 months. Meanwhile, the national average of failure throughout that same type of time period for, the nation overall is only 30%. It's less than that. So we're failing at nearly triple the rate of the rest of the country. This is what I'm talking about. When we start doing the things that I'm telling you not to do, you're sidestepping a bigger problem by begging for these customers. The Nixonites and the delusional black capitalists are selling you a pipe dream, especially on YouTube, with no gasoline in it. They love that. People in our community, no shade on my people. I love my people. If you're truly my people, because some of y'all look like my people, but you're not my people. There are too many people who are on YouTube and doing podcasts and got all sorts of merch that are selling you the idea you're going to create you a 7-figure business and have unlimited success. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I just told you 80% of y'all about to fall down the tube. And if you put too much of yourself into that business, if you put too much on the line, you gonna go down the tube with it. What isn't a pipe dream, though, is doing politics through advocating for a black agenda. We could have done that in 2020 during that election, but everyone was off cold. Now we're dying from COVID at a nearly 50% higher rate than the rest of America. And the president just signed a bill giving a Native American tribe that once held us as slaves more control over their own land. So listen, I think we got one more thing we need to get into here. And I want to address the notion brought up by certain capitalistic shows again and outlets and people that talk a lot about black people being self-determining in terms of we're just going to build our own in some silo, or we're going to, press forward and fix this without actually engaging in politics. There is a particular show here on YouTube that opened this dialogue that black business is the only way to address the crime in our community. One of the hosts asserted that black businesses hire these young men and women who would otherwise have idle hands and a need for money. I can understand that. I can understand where that idea or that thought process comes from, that idle hands will lead, of course we know idle hands will lead to, it's the devil's playground. And of course we understand that if they had jobs, they could have things that, can keep them occupied, that would give them an income, that would give them a way to do whatever they want to do and take care of themselves without having to resort to underground economy activities or other things of the sort. So my answer to that is that, yeah, they help. But don't ever push business before politics. Don't ever push business before politics. You cannot sustain black business without black politics. If you don't have black supporting policies, black protecting policies, your business will eventually hit a wall. And a lot of people don't understand that until they get to a point where someone actually is dealing with them in a real way. And then they find out, oh snap, that's why I had to do it that way. It ain't because I was just doing a particular type of business. It's because I'm black. Anyone saying anything different is either misinformed or attempting to misinform. So in conclusion, this is not a question of black people supporting their own. This is not a question of people supporting black businesses. This is not a question of support. Businesses don't run on support. They run on earned customers and doing business. Yes, we want black businesses. We want them to succeed, but they need to have the ability and be armed to be competitive in the open economy of this melting pot, which we're only halfway integrated into anyway, so it's kind of hard to do that. We gotta press through with the economic integration, which is one of the biggest elements that did not get done in the aftermath of all the civil rights achievements. And we gotta demand the social economic justice. That justice is not loans, it's wealth injection, because our wealth would have been used to build more and better businesses was it not stolen and crimes that were committed against us ignored? It's wealth injection with training and set-asides because we were locked out for so long. Now, let me talk about set-asides real quickly. I watched a nice interview of a certain pizzeria in Nashville called Slim and Husky's. In that interview, they talked about the basic notion they talked about the history of how they started this moving business and how the moving business that they started with only like $3,000, I believe, how that was used and it created and they built it up and it was sold to make over $1 million that they would flip into starting their pizzeria, Slim and Husky's. So Slim and Husky's, the three guys who founded Slim and Husky's, they started off with a moving business. And then that moving business accrued in value. It became an asset overall, right? They got like all these trucks, they got these standard procedures, they got this customer base, they got all these things that made it valuable. So when they sold it, they were able to actually take home over $1 million. Now, one of the big things that they had that allowed their business to be successful that they did not sell as part of the moving business sale was government contracts that they were getting. They were getting government contracts with that moving business that basically they didn't even have to bid on these contracts because of a special government program. And I believe it was 8A. They call it 8A for short. And so this program allowed minority businesses to get access to doing business with the federal government without having to bid. And they had these very specific, requirements and a lot of things they had to go through to do in order to be certified as 8A. With that being said, that's a perfect example because they probably would have lost out on a ton of money that they really needed in order to make their business viable if they didn't get that 8A certification. I don't know that they would have been able to build up a business without that certification that would have sold for $1 million. Even though they sold it for $1 million, they definitely were getting income from the 8A work that was fed over to sustain this, or to help continue to grow the moving business in a way that allowed it to become more valuable quickly. And that resulted in a business with an evaluation that put $1 million in their pockets. They were able to flip to create a pizzeria. So the key thing here is that you don't have a program like 8A available for you to get contracts as a black business if you don't do politics. So 8A was created by the hard sweat equity of others who came before them, because this was there before them. Even if you claim that this is a white government and it was a white written policy, they didn't write it in a vacuum that somehow was void of black activists and advocates pushing for set-asides, because they admitted in the interview that was a set-aside they were able to take advantage of to help their business grow. So that's just a very small example of how a black business was successful. And I know there are many examples of how black businesses have been successful taking advantage of existing government programs, set-asides, and so forth. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, and yet still we got 80% failure rate, right? So that tells you that there's not enough out there, whether it be government set-asides or it be a whole litany of other things, especially what I'm talking about, which is the familial wealth, the community and familial wealth that can be used to create new businesses that white people just take for granted. They just do it. Even if they don't even have it in their family, they know people who have it in their business and they can take it out as equity and use it to create new businesses or do whatever financial maneuver they want to do. But we can't even have discussions like that. And I think that was a very interesting interview, so I'm going to link it in the description of this video on YouTube. If you see this video anywhere else, go to my YouTube channel. You'll see the link to that interview of the Slim and Husky's founders, and how they talked about how they came up and how they created their business. So, with all that being said, when we talk about things like this, when we talk about these policies, we talk about these set-asides, when we talk about the training, when we talk about all these different things that come together, and you start talking like this, what you're really talking about is a well-appointed, comprehensive package. A package of recompense and repair to address the oppression of black capitalism, because if black capitalism hadn't been oppressed and cut off of the earth repetitively in different ways, then we'd have a history and legacy of not only wealth and knowledge, but also successful businesses that would be in play today and maybe have grown to national chains that are actually well known as black chains. But you can't name a lot of them. Matter of fact, in that interview, the Slim and Husky founders, they said they couldn't find a black chain of any, like a black-owned franchise, not black-owned franchise locations, but a fully black-owned franchise where the actual owners of the entire business, like the McDonald's, the head level, were black, and then they franchised it out and it went everywhere. They couldn't find that. So they're thinking that there might be, they might be pioneers in this space. They're going to be black owners of a restaurant that's now franchising out and going across the country, because they are now not only in Nashville, but they're also all the way out in Sacramento. And of course, they're in Atlanta and some other places as well. So that is what happens when your community is not allowed to grow and thrive in the economy in an equitable way. And to think that today, with an 80% business failure rate, that we have fixed it, you'd be wrong. And I will tell you that when you tell people to just come support you because you're black, you're ignoring the real work that needs to be done. I'm not here to scold or flame people, but I'm telling you to think about this very critically. And when we talk about putting together all of these different elements to create these packages, these comprehensive approaches to recompense, repair, and building up of a black economic engine, what you're talking about is an element of reparations. And so, as you respond in your head to that R word, that reparations word, I'm sure you're saying, we'll never get that. Well, of course, that's how they want you to think, so that you don't ever demand it or hold anyone accountable. Or you might even be saying, I don't want a handout. But here's a question. You'd take an inheritance today if your family gave it to you, right? If you had a rightfully descending inheritance coming to you, would you take it? You could have had something like that had they not been pillaging your ancestors or your great-great-grandfather or even your grandfather. The systems that have been used against us are so many of them, so widespread, some of them so insidious that you don't even understand how even your own parents may have been stolen from by the practices the government codified or at least allowed to go unchecked. You got to really understand anything from obscene mortgage interest rates all the way to straight up eminent domain with no compensation, and these highways that just ran through black neighborhoods and black communities and they weren't properly compensated for. Those type of things that you don't think that much of are really how they've gotten us so badly. Any other community, they would fight back and they would get back what they were owed if things like this were systemically found to be happening to them. And I say community loosely because white people aren't a community, but they could have had something for you if they hadn't been pillaged and sidetracked. Reparations is getting back that diverted inheritance. It's not a gift of pity or guilt. A pity gift would be begging for business on the basis of being black. No one owes any business their patronage, black or not. But the government owes us a lot for our entire community, businesses or not. Unfortunately, in capitalism, business is earned by being the best option for each customer. And that's why so many black customers don't come to black businesses necessarily. They just go to the best business. If it happens to be black owned, they'll go to it. If it's not, they're not going to get twisted in a bundle about it. And that's why Maggie Anderson's, I may be saying her name, that's why Miss Anderson's experiment was very frustrating, because she had to drive all over and then eventually some of the places closed on her. People will go where it makes sense for them to go, especially when you don't have money. Black people ain't got time to necessarily pay extra money for gas to go further to a black spot, or pay extra money for the unit price of the same widget at the black spot versus going to the Walmart next door. I hate to say that. I'm not trying to tell you that we should support Walmart, but I will say that Walmart's annual revenue is greater than all black businesses combined. Like, I think its annual net Like, it's bigger than all black business combined. That's just one company, and they're not the only one that's bigger than us, but Walmart is one of the most well-known names that you can put up there to say, hey, listen, Walmart's bigger than all black business combined, period. So keep that notion in your head and understand this is bigger than just supporting our own. In capitalism, business earns customers by being the best option for each customer, not being the black option. That's why black people don't show up. And that's why crying out, support black business, is not necessarily what we want to be doing long term. That's not a real solution. But if you are saying that, you really should be crying out, support reparations.